I've been falling deeper, crawling on the ocean floor. I've been sinking into you, my love and number one. I left traces of my name across your bedroom door. Plastic roses.
Good morning, everybody. We are finally back in Paris, Texas, where I get to film on my own turf, and I'm with my friend Tony Corso. He's a professional photographer, and this is such a photocentric industry, and everything that we're talking about marketing-wise has to deal with photos. And so I wanted somebody with a whole lot more knowledge than I do to come in and just talk about some different aspects. So Tony, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit of intro, what you've been doing the last few years and where you're at now.
All right. Well, I've been telling people I'm on my fourth career. I came up here in Northeast Texas back in '89 to actually pastor a church, and then got into teaching school. And then somehow, after my youngest daughter graduated from high school, I was looking at an empty nest, and my father-in-law kind of nudged me back into a long-lost passion and the photography hobby. I'd done it years ago, back in the days of film. And so I got a new digital camera and started playing around, fell in love with it all over again, and just started taking pictures of just about everything. I was drawn to the sports, the sporting games, and so then I really got dangerous and dabbled into the world of having a website. And I still continue to be in over my head with that. But just started posting pictures. And the more I posted, the more people started contacting me and using Facebook and my website, and next thing I know, I was needing to buy a new lens to get this and doing family portraits, and it just kind of took off, and that's what I've been doing since 2007, so I guess going on 10 years.
Yeah. The Facebook photos, it's exactly why you're here today, because most of us are going to be using our pictures to tell our farm story on some type of social media. I'm guessing primarily Facebook for the most part. Let's talk a little bit about having an eye for the shot. Everywhere we go on the farm, there could be a potential picture. There's water cans and fence lines and trees and sunsets and sunrises and just plants germinating. There's always something going on. It's always something changing, picking up seasonal changes. When somebody asks you, what makes a good shot, there's so many things that play into it, but let's first go into framing a picture. Instead of just taking that picture randomly, how do you go about setting up a shot?
Well, I think there's a good question to ask yourself is, do you want to take pictures or do you want to take photographs? And I don't want to get overly deep about that, but I think anybody can take a picture. I strive to capture a good photograph, because a photograph is going to tell a story. It's going to capture the eye of the viewer, and so that's what I strive to do. A lot of times, and nowadays too, I think with the digital age, so many more people are becoming photographers. The digital revolution made it easier for people to go out and get a decent camera, take better pictures, and not have to fool with the laboratory of developing film and prints. Can pull them up on their computer. So huge amount of people coming in, buying the nicer cameras, and so they go out and they take pictures, and you can see on Photoshop, or on Facebook, a lot of people go out and they'll take a bunch of their pictures, and then they'll take their card and they'll dump all of the photographs on their Facebook page. And it's just kind of a cumbersome task to who wants to go through 200 pictures? But I think people need to learn to be a little bit more selective in what they post. People tell me a lot of times, "Oh, Tony, you're such a great photographer. All your pictures are so good." I said, "Well, it's because I don't post the bad ones, and believe me, I take plenty of those." But as far as just framing a shot, I had a lady who's been contacting me recently. She's been taking some pictures of her little boy playing the little organized football league. So she was asking me for some tips and what kind of lens she needed to use, and it was daytime, so there wasn't that many challenges other than just going out and taking them, and she was posting all the pictures, and I remember I was looking through some of them, and it was just crowds of kids out there. They were just you know, a dozen kids on the field, and you really couldn't tell what was happening. So I sent her a message, and I said, okay, I see you're getting your exposures right. You got some good action in there. Let's try this. And so I sent her an example of a picture that I had taken, that I had posted recently, and then I showed her the picture that came straight out of the camera. And it was very obvious what I had done. I had cropped out a lot of the dead space. And so I explained to her, I said, you know, you just don't want dead space and non-activity in the photograph. Crop that picture, even if you don't have a big enough lens to get in up close, crop out all the dead space so that your eye is drawn to the main part of the subject. So I just noticed the other day, she had posted some more pictures, and it was kind of fun, I guess, as a former school teacher to see the student taking your advice. And she had some great shots, and it was just nothing but the kid that was being tackled by the tackler, and it was all in focus. And so I messaged her real quick, and I just said, hey, way to go, I see you got that right. So sometimes it's just a simple crop can make a picture into a photograph.
Sure. And now that I've been doing all this, and I generally take a lot of pictures anyway, but now that I'm actually going out and filming people and doing all this other kind of thing, I take, where normally I would have shot 100 pictures, I'm shooting 600 or 700. And then, you know, that is all people see is the good ones, and there's just massive amounts of information that we're generating through this. We're going so fast nowadays, and trying to put the farm in here and put the farm in there where we can. And I teach people, I say, you know, this really doesn't take a lot of time to post every day, but slowing down and being mindful of that moment or of that subject really does help.
Well, you know, whatever you're taking pictures of, whether it's plants, landscape, sports, people, pets, zoo, animals, I think there's a lot to be learned by looking at other photographs that draw your attention. I mean, you can go to any website, you can Google in, you know, or go onto Yahoo and just type in images and name your subject, and there are literally thousands of images to look at. You know, back in the day, we used to look through photo albums and magazines, but now you just click your mouse. And one of the things I try to encourage, because I do these classes from time to time for entry-level photographers wanting to learn how to shoot in manual mode, I said, you know, when you see a picture that makes you kind of go, ooh, I like that, ask yourself, what is it about that picture that caught your eye? Was it the lighting on it? Was it the way it was framed? Was it the angle that you shot at? Was it something that was really down low or up high? What was it about that picture that you liked? It's not rocket science. There's something about it that captured your attention. Then you can very easily go out and duplicate that with just a few tips of how to work the camera. And I mean, because nobody out there is that unique. And I guarantee you, if somebody goes out and captures a particular picture, we were talking earlier about the supermoon. You know, all it takes is one time to see an airplane passing in front of a full moon. Everybody's gonna go out and try and capture that shot. And so let your imagination be stimulated by others and go out and duplicate it.
And let's talk about the practice of it. I mean, we're sitting here talking about taking a ton of pictures. It takes a lot of practice to go from, hey, I just started on Facebook, to 2 years from now, you know, what's your marketing material is going to look like, because you've just simply practiced and learning not to be afraid of the camera or even the iPhone, you know, to use different filters, to get different angles, get on the ground, get up on the ladder. It takes an extraordinary amount of just footage to find that one. And oftentimes I find that once I load it up, it's the one I didn't give any consideration at the time that winds up being the best shot.
Right, right. Well, and again, you know, back in the days when we used to shoot a roll of film, 36 exposure, if I went and shot a football game and I came home with 2 good shots on a roll, I was ecstatic. And a lot of photographers will tell you that. Nowadays, in the digital age, with the gear that we have and the improvement in the being able to shoot in low light, what have you, it's not uncommon to come home after shooting a game and just having a much higher percentage of good shots.
And if you don't mind, at a much cheaper level. Sure, the cameras may be higher, but we're not having to buy all that film and then wait 2 or 3 days or, you know, even an hour to see them, you know, what actually came through. So
exactly. One of the things I like to take pictures of is the weather shots and lightning. And so I can come in and I can post a couple of lightning pictures and that I got, and some, you know, incredible lightning bolts shooting across the sky or striking the ground, and people are just so amazed. Wow, you know, how did you do that? I said, well, would you like to see the 200 where it's solid black? I didn't get anything.
Yeah.
You know, there's a little bit of luck involved on that.
Well, and it's like everybody here is going to relate to this. So oftentimes we'll be at farmers markets, and people come up and they'll either really like the vegetables that you have and how pretty they are and this, that, and the other, or you'll get that small percentage that wants to tell you how to farm. I mean, how many people come up and say, "Oh, I like that, but what if you did?" People are always critiquing everything. So it's funny to relate how many photographs you have to take to get that one or two good ones, and as a farmer, knowing how much we actually have to produce just to go to market. There's always a little bit of waste, and then there's always that one person that's going to critique everything that you bring up there, So
yeah, well, the older you get, the more you just learn to smile and say little or say less. So,
yeah.
But you mentioned too the practice thing. Whether it's a musical instrument, a singing skill, learning how to rope, whatever your niche is. I mean, everybody will tell you, the more you work at something, the more proficient you're going to become. I had a professional photographer who's a friend of family here a while back. We saw at summer vacation, and he mentioned he watches or follows me on Facebook, and he made a statement. We were out there sitting in the inner tubes out in the lagoon or in the lake area, and he said, "Tony," he says, "one of the things that I've noticed that you do that more photographers need to do," he goes, "you're shooting every day." Of course, my wife was in the background, and she chimed, "Oh, that's for sure." But I mean, it's just the more you do something and work at something, it's just going to become second nature.
And it's harder not to see stuff. Like my wife, we just got back from New York, and of course I had my cameras, and of course every 5 seconds I'm taking a picture. Instead of walking a block, it seems like we almost walk a mile, because every 2 steps I see something. We walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, and it took forever.
Yeah.
And by the time we started to the time we finished, the sun, it was a nice sunset, and then by the time we got to the other side, to the Manhattan side, it was night. And then I got to play with all the headlights, right? So
yeah, night shots.
So
I saw some of your pictures, and I remember thinking, I get it, I understand it.
Yeah. And again, you didn't see all the
No.
the hundreds of them. So we've talked about how we can generate a lot of photos. We've talked about practice and that kind of thing. In your opinion, how powerful can a photo really become? I mean, obviously some of us can see photos and be moved very dramatically, and at market or trying to tell our farm story. I mean, we want people to see the real thing, and it's often hard to present the realities of a situation when we know we want that photograph to be the very best it can be, and there's a fine line of that photo's touched up or it's the real thing. I tend not to use a lot of filters. I will go and change lighting, and a lot of people will take the light and jack it up. I'll actually, most of the time, take light down because of our situation. We got a ton of light in the grow room. We got a massive amount of light in the greenhouses. I don't like to shoot in the middle of the day just because it's so hard to control that. But morning shots, afternoon shots, that kind of thing is my favorite time to take a picture anywhere, because in the greenhouse, the light's just better. Kind of talk about that aspect of it. I mean, how do you feel about over photoshopping something? Because we've all seen that. But if we're going to portray our farm to be a truthful shot, what's a tasteful way to edit that?
Well, I like to use the example, having been married for 35 years and having raised 3 daughters, the subject of makeup. A lot of women like to wear makeup, and everyone has their own preference on how much makeup they feel like they need to wear. I heard a preacher say one time years ago, there's some churches that don't believe that a woman should wear makeup at all. His theology on it was, I think for a lot of women it really is a sin to wear makeup, and for some women it's a sin not to. That's just a take on it, and believe me, I'm going some way with this. I probably never post any photograph where I haven't gone in and done some subtle touching up, even if it's just a simple crop, which can make a huge difference in a photograph. Just cropping out stuff that you don't need to have in there. I think the average woman likes to put on a touch of makeup, as I like to say it, to enhance the beauty that's already there. I've gotten wiser over the years. And I think a photograph is worthy of that. Even back in the film days, photographers just didn't expose to the paper and develop. They would use filters to boost the contrast, especially if you're talking black and white. Or they might use some little dodging tools to burn in something or to darken something or keep something, So there's always been a little bit of manipulating with photography. Nowadays it's kind of gone to the extreme because you can go in and, I would be tempted to photograph my head and put it on Arnold Schwarzenegger's, well, maybe a younger, maybe Chris Rock, or not Chris Rock, but whoever's the guy that just got Sexiest Man Alive. I mean, there's so much you can do that you really have reason to question whether or not the pictures you see today online are even legitimate. But some very simple tweaks can make a good photograph that much better. And say, well, how much is too much? I was looking at some pictures today actually online, and there were some football games. The guy had shot at night football, and the first thing that struck me was somebody must have bumped his arm when he hit the saturation level, because it was like they were the highway department in all fluorescent clothes. He had boosted the colors so much, there was no need for that. I think just, if you can tell the difference, if you cannot tell the difference between a photo that you've taken prior to editing some and then after editing, and if they're two separate photographs, you've probably done too much. But the basic things you're working on is just your contrast, just kind of boosting the contrast, giving a little bit of a kick factor. Depending on the lighting and the time of day you're shooting in, sometimes a photograph can appear just a little flat. And just a little contrast boost, a little saturation boost can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and look, everybody, it's very important that you just at least start playing with it if you're not already. Most times I'll look on somebody's Facebook page that hasn't been doing it for too long, and it's just a mess of, it's either too many pictures, or we have a picture of our whole booth and we're not focused in on anything. So there's a lot of stuff there, but what's the quality? How good is it? So I always like to take individual shots. And look, we've brought individual vegetables in here before market and just set them on some craft paper, put up the lights, and took pictures. That's the truth, because that's how they looked. Did they look a whole lot better than they would have just pulled out of the dirt? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, that's what we took to market. That was the real thing. And I always like to, when we do any kind of engagement, social media deal or advertisement, I always like to stay positive. I always like to make sure we tell the truth, not disparage anybody else. I don't like anything negative on there, and the pictures have to be legitimate to me. I mean, it's, again, not overly editing, not overly adjusting the color, but if you can do just a little bit to make it more presentable.
Yeah. Well,
it's like putting vegetables on a plate and making it presentable. That's the real thing, but you just made it look better.
Well, the beauty too about the digital, and we've already talked about that. We don't have the extra cost of having to go through 20 rolls of film.
Yeah.
And you can put an awful lot of pictures on a little SD or memory card. Why not go overkill and take 30 pictures of that carrot from 30 different angles, and just shoot and try this and try that, and there is no wrong way. You just get out there and just shoot. And then it's amazing, because this happens to me all the time, and I do shoot a lot of sporting events, or I'll go out and shoot a sunset or weather, and I can fire off, and my shutter thing, I can shoot off an awful lot of frames per second. And I'm just shooting like crazy. And there are some times when I'll know, I got that shot, I got that, because I'll chimp and take a look at it. But more often than not, I'll come home with all those pictures, pull them up on my computer, and just start going through and looking at them. And then there'll be that one shot that just jumps out at you, and it's like, wow, I had no idea. Or maybe I didn't see this at the moment, but then just zooming in on that main subject, and then all of a sudden I realize, wow, I've got a photograph here. And so there's no loss in just getting as many images as you can from many different perspectives, and you'll find out that I'd like to say that every shot of mine's planned, but I know better. Sometimes I get lucky. Sometimes I think I know what I'm wanting. With sports, it's hard to predict. But I think just giving yourself an opportunity to have something to look at, you're going to get that one picture that's going to be your marquee shot.
Yeah. So I think it's important to go over just a couple of points before we head on. A lot of people are just using their iPhones. A lot of people have a DSLR, but maybe they're not putting it in manual mode, which makes a tremendous amount of difference for me. A lot of times I'll use the portrait or the close-up if I hate to say it, but if I'm in a hurry or just a shot comes up and I'm on the move or whatever. But more and more I find myself using those manual settings. So let's dive in for those of you who aren't using those and kind of go over what each one of these things do within this camera. So we're going to talk about ISO, f-stop, aperture, and something that's been more and more important to me is the white balance. So if you'll kind of go through the very basics of what those functions do within a camera and how it affects it. So
all right,
let's look at ISO first.
All right. Well, let me just, if I can, just back up just a little bit and talk about how with the evolution of these digital cameras, when the digital age occurred, they were buying these little point-and-shoot cameras. And I remember being mesmerized by them when I first saw them because, I was from the film days. They had limitations. They took some pretty sharp pictures in most conditions, but they had certain limitations, especially if you were getting something that was moving. There was always that delay. Then the phones came out and started taking some pretty impressive pictures. And so people went out and started, using their iPhones or whatever phone they had. The point and shoots were becoming a thing of the past, and then it was like, okay, I want to up my game. So they went out and bought a DSLR camera, where you can take the lenses off and add bigger lenses, what have you. And all of a sudden people realized, wow, there's all these buttons and dials on here and these settings, and they didn't have any idea what they were, so they just kept it in the auto mode. So now what they have is a very expensive point-and-shoot camera. And so that's kind of one of the things that I've been doing in some of these introductory classes that I offer in the area from time to time when I've got time to do that. And that's to kind of get people out of shooting the auto mode, because what happens is, and again, the technology on these cameras just boggles my mind continuously. Take autofocus, for example. There was no such thing back when I used to shoot with film. When I bought my first digital DSLR camera, it took me a year to trust autofocus. I just didn't know how I could do that.
Yeah.
And so, then finally, that's all I ever shoot for the most part is an autofocus. The challenge that people have when they shoot in auto mode is you have this pretty intricate computer inside the camera, whether it's your phone, your point and shoot, or your DSLR, and you're going out and you're sizing up a photograph, and the little metering system inside the camera is basically saying, all right, Joe photographer, this is what we're going to do. And it takes the picture, and the majority of time it's going to be a properly exposed photograph, and it's going to be a nice shot. The problem is you're going to find yourself in a setting or a situation, and I like to use the example of a sunset. Everybody sees a beautiful sunset, and they want to go out and take a picture of it. And so how many times have you gone out, whether it's with your phone or your camera, in your auto mode, and you've taken a picture of that sunset and you look at it, and it doesn't look anything like what your eye just saw? Well, why is that? Well, part of it is when you're looking at a sunset, you have such a dynamic range of light going on. You have the intense bright sun itself that may be setting behind some mountains or on the ocean or just across the prairie, and it's going to be casting different color schemes on the clouds above. And you might have this pasture land in front of you, and because the sun's going down, it's getting darker. And so the meter in the camera is going, oh, well, let's see, that sun's real bright, but the foreground's real dark, and there's some pretty colors up there, and so it cannot do what the human brain and the eyes can do, and that is see it all as it is. And so what it does, it goes, well, let's just kind of go for the in-between. And so when you go with the in-between, you end up with your sun being washed out or blown out, your foreground's still too dark, the colors seem flat, and people go home very disappointed. How many people went out and took a picture of the supermoon this week with their phone, and they were like, wow, that's a beautiful moon, and they snapped it, and all they saw was this basic white circle on this black screen. So that's why it's so important to get away from the auto, because once you get into the manual mode, now you start telling the camera, all right, Joe Camera, this is what we're going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it.
And I think it's worth saying, you're not going to break it by playing with it. I mean, just, earlier you talked about shooting a carrot from 30 different angles. Nowadays, I'm shooting a carrot with one angle with 30 different settings. Just trying to figure it out and learn.
Right.
But that's part of my practice, right? That's part of me learning how to use that camera. And trust me, the more you do it, the more your eye starts to define light, and kind of intuitively know what the camera's going to pick up and not pick up.
Right.
It is a learned skill for the most part, and it's learned by practice.
Yeah. Did you ever play any musical instruments growing up as a kid?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Piano players, a proficient piano player, they make it look so easy. I took piano lessons and was like, what do you mean I have to practice?
Yeah.
Same thing with the guitar. I made a stab at the guitar, and the practicing part was the part I didn't want to do. But any musician worth their salt spends an awful lot of time doing it. Same thing with the pictures, taking the pictures, practicing the different settings. Because when I do these classes, I always tell people that don't worry if you get in a jam and you're trying to break away from that auto and you really want to get this picture, it's okay. You can still go to heaven if you shoot in automatic mode. That's not going to ban you. But getting out, at some point in time, the more you do it, it does become second nature. I was walking with some friends down the trail one time, and it was about sunset, and the sun was filtering through the trees, and we've all seen that shot, and we think, oh my gosh, that looks so beautiful. And I've been there, done that before, and again, the problem with that shot is if you try to just take a picture of it in auto mode, your sunlight's going to be blown out, the background's going to be too dark because you have such a dynamic range. And so sometimes it's just understanding, okay, let me go ahead and do these settings.
So ISO.
Okay. Yeah. The three primary settings, and you mentioned auto white balance, which for the most part, unless you're dealing with artificial lighting like you.
And I think that's my issue, because a lot of times I'll be in a greenhouse with just sunlight, or I'll be in a greenhouse with just artificial light, or I'll be in a greenhouse with both. And then I come into my grow room, and I know exactly that that's 3,000 Kelvin and 6,000 Kelvin. So I think, for the most part, I know about light just a tad bit more than a conventional grower, because we're having to deal with that kind of thing.
And we just lost about 75 to 95% of the audience when you started talking about 3,000 Kelvin, because people are going, what are we talking about?
Indoor growers know very well what I'm talking about. So.
Yeah, the lighting scheme. But let's just go ahead real quick. The camera, and I don't want to do the information overload on anybody today, but there's three primary settings that you use in a camera in a manual mode that all have to work together. The first one is the ISO, and what that has to do with is the sensor inside the camera. Film days, it was the film itself, and we called it ASA. It was the speed of the film. You shot different speeds in low light versus when you had plenty of sunlight. But what you're basically doing in layman's terms is you're adjusting your ISO or your sensor, your sensitivity level on your sensor, and you're telling your camera, okay, we walked outside, it's really bright. I got this. I don't need a lot of help today, sensor. So let's just dial it down to the lower settings, around 200 or 400 ISO. The minute you walk indoors and you're inside one of those, an old gymnasium or an old barn or what have you, or the sun's gone down and now you're shooting at dusk, what you are telling your sensor is, all right, warning, we don't have a lot of light. I need your help. And so you dial it up to the higher settings, 1600, 3200, 6400, and some cameras even higher. And what that does is it tells the sensor, it creates a higher sensitivity level to where it's able to extract the image onto the sensor, which becomes the photograph. But if I'm shooting indoors and I have a real high ISO setting, because I'm really super sensitive to needing as much light as I can, and then I forget to change it when I go back outside, I mean, it's going to be like everything's going to be blown out, and you'll realize that real quick. I like to use the analogy that a high sensor setting, ISO setting, is like night vision goggles. We've all seen the war movies where the guys go in at night and they put on the goggles, and now, instead of walking through dark hallways and corridors, they are able to see as if it's I don't want to say daytime, but the vision is obviously much better than if they had no light at all.
Yeah.
So,
So at the end of the day, ISO is either letting more or less light into the camera.
it is, and it's allowing the camera to pick up what normally, again, if you take a picture, most people will tell you this, if they go into the gym, take a picture of their kid playing a basketball game or just, coming in here without any extra lights other than what's already in here, and you take a picture, your camera is just going to you're going to look at it, it's going to be very dark. Or the flash, if you're in auto mode, the flash may just pop up because it's like, dude, you don't have enough light, you need some help. And so, but instead of using the flash, because a lot of times you don't want a flash, you may be in a setting, a museum or church or wherever, where they don't want a flash going off at a wedding, or you just don't want that flash blowing out. And so by cranking up the ISO, it's going to allow you to take a decent photograph without the extra light of artificial light and still get a good image. Now, something to keep in mind in photography, anytime you gain something, you lose something. The higher the ISO setting is, oftentimes you will see a decrease in the actual quality of the image. We call it noise. Back in the film days, it was grain. So if you were shooting with a real high, and a lot of people go out and they buy these cameras, these entry-level DSLRs. You might have paid $600 for, it might have been a Nikon or a Canon, one of the T5s or series, and they're good cameras, don't get me wrong, but that's entry-level. And you might be able to crank that ISO up to a real high setting if you're shooting indoors in available light, but you will also notice your pictures will tend to have a certain element of what we call noise or grain. They just look grainier. It's not pixelated, and it's not blurred because it's out of focus. It just has a grainier texture to it, and that's just part of the again, using the night vision goggle analogy, it's not like you'd want to watch a whole movie in that vibrant green, but it's certainly not looking at HDR type color, rich color, if you were in a normal setting. So, that's one of the flip sides for the ISO, but it does allow you to take the picture that you normally would not be able to do.
Okay. So the next setting that I mess with, and I think the natural progression, is the f-stop.
Okay. The aperture, which is denoted by f-stops on the camera, and again, that ties in with the lens. Now, the ISO had to do with the sensor. The aperture has to do with the lens. Think about what happens when your eye pupil dilates. That's what your lens does. Your lens opens up and it closes down in the same way that your pupil dilates. We've all gone to an afternoon matinee movie into a theater at one point or another and got there just a few minutes late and the movie's already started. So what's happening? You can't see a thing. So you're standing in the back of the theater waiting for your eyes to adjust because you really don't want to just walk in and sit on somebody's lap. That's always awkward. So you notice after a minute or two, now you can see a little bit better. Well, what's happened is your pupil is dilated and opened up as much as it possibly can to allow more light in. You're able to adjust, you go in and you watch the movie. And then, of course, what happens if it's still daylight when you walk out those doors? And the sun's real bright. You've been in a dark room, your eyes are totally wide open. The minute you walk outside, you're crunching your eyes, you're looking for your sunglasses, because there's so much more light, your pupil's needing to dilate down. That's what the lens aperture does. Most lenses, most cameras, the average photographer that's going to have a DSLR camera, he's going to have a little kit lens on there. It might be an 18 to 55 or a 50 to 100 millimeter type lens. And there's going to be settings on there, and you're going to see they're going to go in increments of like maybe 3.5 and 4 and 5.6 and 8. Those are f-stops. And they'll go all the way up to 16, 22. Usually the average camera is going to go up to about 22. Now this is, again, I don't want to do information overload here, but the larger the number of the f-stop, the smaller the opening of the lens. The smaller the number, the wide open that lens is going to be. So for the average person that's got the little zoom, the 18 to 55 millimeter lens, if you are set at 3.5, your f-stop is at 3.5, on that particular lens, that is going to be open as wide as it possibly can, allowing as much light that can possibly get in to come in. Important element here to keep in mind. Because anytime you gain something in photography, you lose something. So why would I want to open it up all the way? Well, because if you're in a dark area, you want as much light coming in. The wider open that aperture is, meaning the smaller the number, 3.5, the smaller or the shorter the depth of field you're going to have with your focus. DOF, depth of field. So if I have a camera and I've opened my lens up as wide as it will be at 3.5, I have a lens that actually goes to 1.4, and depending on the lens you're using, you can even get a larger opening. It's going to become very sensitive on the depth of focus. So if I have my lens wide open and I've got somebody sitting right behind you, for example, and I focus on you, that person right behind you, and they only might be 6 inches, it could be your wife just kind of nestling in there on your shoulder, her face is not going to be in focus because you're going to have such a shallow depth of field. So there are times when you're taking a picture, you want that look. You want that blurred background. When you're doing portraits, that blurred background makes your subject stand out. We call that the bokeh effect. I don't know who made that term up, but that's what they call it. You have that blurred background because you have a shallow depth of field, but your subject is perfectly in focus, and it kind of makes them pop.
That's one of my favorite things to do. If I'm taking a picture, let's say I'm in the greenhouse and I have that one tomato that's on the vine that's just right, to get that in focus and to have the rest of it kind of blurred out, it's a great shot, and it tells a story. I mean,
it does. It's what makes that tomato stand out. Now, if you dialed your lens down the other way to f22, for example, now you're going to have a greater depth of field, which means not only will that tomato be in focus, but so will every other tomato all the way down the line.
Yeah.
Which there are times, if I'm taking a picture of a local soccer team or basketball team, and I've got the kids lined up in 3 rows, mom's not going to be real happy if I focus in on the front row at a shallow depth of field and her little darling is on the back row, because he's going to be out of focus. We were talking a little bit earlier about the supermoon. I went out the other night and the other morning and took a picture of the moon, the full moon that was setting behind our Eiffel Tower here in Paris. It's got the cowboy hat on there. Had my big lens, which did tend to make the lens or the moon look bigger. And one of the things I had to do was, I was back about 150 yards away from the tower, back in a pasture, and I knew that I wanted the cowboy hat. This would be a good time to insert that picture. I'll make sure you can do that.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example because I do this a lot. I wanted the hat in focus, but I also wanted the moon in focus. Now, granted, the moon is several 100,000 miles away, but I didn't want the hat to be in focus and there to be this blurry yellow thing back there and nobody knew what it was. So that meant I had to dial my aperture down to f22. It was either maybe 18 or 22, which gave me a greater amount of depth of field. And I was fortunate, didn't plant it, I didn't put any birdseed up there, but I had 3 blackbirds sitting up on top of the hat, which just made it look that much cooler.
Yeah.
They were in focus. You could tell it was the moon. You could see the whatever it is that's on the moon that gives it texture. And both, for the most part, were in focus. So a lot of times a good photograph just takes a little bit of planning and knowing what your desired effect is. So you said you want to do the tomato shot. Maybe you've got a row of plants and the carrots, for example, the stems coming up out of the ground. That's where you say, okay, well, let's do both shots. Let's do one where we're focused in on right about the middle of the row with a shallow depth of field at a little bit of an angle. And so you get that one stem coming out just razor sharp, but all the other carrots behind it are blurred and all the carrots in front of it are blurred. Just gives it a neat look.
Yeah. Yep. And again, that's what we've done. Another key point is, as you're going through and taking a shallow field, a midfield, a bigger ones, guys, you can reuse these pictures in your marketing over and over and over. So it is worth the extra time to get those better shots. Or more varieties. So even though you're doing one session, you get to use that one session over and over again throughout the year. Unless you're just talking about seasonality, it's a handy time saver to have a backlog of great photographs.
Yeah, and we call that bracketing when you're trying all the different settings, you know, where you're just bracketing your photos. So you're going to shoot one at this depth of field, maybe this one at this field or, you know, setting, and so then you have quite an array to choose from.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's a little bit of planning and knowing what setting will bring the desired effect.
Okay, and the third setting would be shutter speed.
Okay, the shutter speed has to do with how fast or how quickly the shutter is opening on the sensor and allowing light in through the lens to produce the image on the sensor. Think about in terms of your eye blinking, okay, opening and closing. So the ISO dealt with the sensitivity of the sensor, the aperture dealt with how much the lens is opening and closing, and the shutter speed is how quickly the shutter opens up and allows the light in. These three settings, and again, it can be kind of intimidating sometimes when you're going, wait a minute, I'm still trying to figure out the ISO, what do you mean the aperture, and now you're throwing in a third setting. Well, hit the rewind button and play it over again, because all three of these work together. Think of a set of scales, and you've got your two trays, and you want the scale perfectly centered. Well, that scale represents one tray represents the aperture, the other tray represents the shutter speed, and then the base represents the ISO. And so all three of those settings work together to achieve a properly exposed photograph. Okay, and the minute you change any of the other settings, now if you had a perfectly exposed photograph and then you change, well, I want something different now with the aperture, maybe a less depth of field or more depth of field, now you're going to have to counter by adjusting the other setting so that you're back to your properly exposed. Otherwise, you're going to have a picture that's going to be too dark or too light, and everybody knows what that's all about. Shutter speed, and it's amazing, again, how these cameras range, but most of your cameras can have an adjustment where you can keep that shutter open for a full 30 seconds, all the way to the other extreme where it's going to open and close at a speed of, say, 1/4000th of a second.
And those two extremes would be 1/4000th of a second, great for sports. The 30-second, great for night shots.
Right. And just because you want to stop action in a sports game, you just can't automatically say, okay, well, let's go up to 1/4000th of a second, because in photography, it's all about the light. If you don't have enough light, then you cannot shoot at a speed that's not allowing you enough time for whatever light is available to produce the image. And so that's where people start getting into the big money and buying lenses. We call them faster lenses that will open up and allow more light in at a quicker speed. But just to give you a ballpark idea, when I go shoot a football game here in the area at nighttime, some stadiums are lit much better than others. And if I get out on a football field, and I'm normally going to have to crank my ISO up as high as my camera will allow me, 6400 or higher in some cases, and I know that my lens is going to have to be opened as wide as I possibly can, because again, we're not talking a lot of light with just stadium lights. If I get out to a poorly lit field and find that even with the high ISO settings that I can crank up to, and even with as fast a setting as maybe a 2.8 on my lens, which I paid more money for it so I could do that, if I can't shoot at, say, at least 1/400th of a second, then I don't even bother shooting. Because I have found that anything slower than that, you're going to get blur from the movement of the athletes. You know, I've talked to many a disappointed mom that went out and bought the basic DSLR camera and the basic kit lens and thought they were going to go out and get pictures like Sports Illustrated does, and went to these dimly lit gyms and everything's blurry, and they, well, I don't understand why. I said, well, you just didn't have enough light, and the camera wasn't suited for that. So shutter speed is what stops the movement. if I'm taking a picture of an elderly grandmother sitting there in a chair, I really don't have to have a whole lot of light because she's not moving a whole lot, and so I can set that camera up. And as a rule of thumb too, this is something good to keep in mind. Once you get out there and you start figuring how these settings work together, you begin to discover this. But let's say I have a setting and my shutter speed, I only have enough light to shoot at about 1/60th of a second and get a properly exposed photograph. If I crank it up to 1/200th of a second, it's going to be too dark because there wasn't enough light. I have found, and I heard this a number of years ago, and it's just always been kind of a good benchmark, anytime my shutter speed is going to be slower than 1/60th of a second, I recommend the use of a tripod or the camera being stationary. Maybe you don't have a tripod and you can rig up your camera and a book and get it positioned so that there's not going to be any movement, because anything slower than 1/60th of a second, you may not be on a treadmill or on the back of a motorcycle, but you'd be surprised shooting at 1/25th of a second or 1/30th of a second even, just the little bit of camera shake will cause there to be a little bit of blur in your picture, and nobody likes blurry pictures.
And I think at this point it's worth noting that if that's the case, on a flimsy tripod, even just touching that shutter button's enough to move it just enough. So
exactly, and that's where you can get into using a remote, to trigger that. I mentioned the other day about taking that moonshot. I got out there in that pasture, and I had a 400 millimeter lens with a 1.4 extender on a camera that had a 1.6 crop factor, which again, all that translates is to say that that was like shooting on almost a 1,000 millimeter telescope. Okay, now the camera shake and motion is that much more magnified the bigger the lens setup. You remember the first time as a kid someone put a pair of binoculars in your hands and they were high powered and you were like, where to go, and you didn't think you were moving. Well, it was so sensitive to any kind of movement that it was just hard to keep it still. Well, when I was out in the pasture doing the moonshot, just touching the shutter caused there to be a little bit of vibration, and I could see the moon and the tower vibrating. Well, I had forgot to bring my wireless remote with me, and I was kicking myself, and then I remembered I just recently acquired a new camera that has a built-in Wi-Fi, and the app is on my phone. So I switched camera bodies, put that camera on there, put on the Wi-Fi. Technology is amazing, I'm telling you.
And look, we may be nerding out on everybody here, but it's okay to hear this, because at least if you start playing with these cameras long enough, you want a better one, right?
Yeah, it kind of happens that way. But I was able to sit there on my phone to trigger the shutter and not worry about bumping the camera and causing any kind of camera shake. And there are times, you mentioned about being in New York and wanting to do night shots. If you're taking pictures at nighttime with just the available light from the buildings and street lights and what have you, you need a longer exposure time. You might have to have your shutter open for 1 full second or 5 seconds, and it creates a beautiful look. Problem is, you can't do that handheld. So you are going to need some kind of a triggering device.
Or just so we're clear, you can't put it on the bridge either, because that dude's shaking too.
Yeah,
that happens.
Yeah. So shutter speed is just, like I said, anything slower than 1/60th of a second, it's good to fix the camera on a tripod, or just maybe on some books or something to where you don't have to really worry about, touching it. And also, most of your cameras are going to be equipped with a timer. So even if you don't have the fancy wireless remote or you have the app on your phone, you can set your timer on there, and usually most cameras are going to have a 2-second setting and a 10-second setting. You can set it for 2 seconds, focus in on your picture, push the button, and then your hand's off, and you have full 2 seconds before that shutter releases, and you can capture your picture without there being any kind of a camera shake.
No, it's a good tip. So one last thing that we'll talk about on the technical side, the nerdy things that we've been talking about, is white balance. Again, for me, I've shot in greenhouses. I've had to shoot, unfortunately, in full sun. Like some of the videos that you'll see on State of the Soil, they're a little blurred out, because my white balance wasn't set. And it was funny, as these interviews have progressed over the last 5-6 months, the camera's gotten better, because I've been able to dial in and learn and practice as we've gone along. not to say that the first ones were terrible, but there's a noticeable difference. But being in all these different environments, inside, outside, diffused light, grow room lights, it's, number one, we're shooting on 2 cameras here, so I've had to make sure all the settings are the same on both, and that's why I have twin cameras. But just briefly, as briefly as we can here,
Yeah.
go into white balance, because I'm sure both of us could talk about that for a long time. But
Well, actually, and surprisingly, unless you're doing specialized photography like you and most of your acquaintances will be doing with controlled lighting, the settings on the camera, and it's usually you're going to see on there's a dial that's going to say AWB, and that's what he's talking about, the auto white balance. The majority of the time, that's the only setting I keep them on with what I'm shooting. Now, whether it's outdoors or what have you, but I've gone indoors and, different gyms had different kind of lighting, incandescent lighting, the fluorescent lighting, and we've all seen that. You've looked at your picture and all of a sudden it looks a little blue, okay? There's a bluish tint to it, which we call, it was cool, there's a cooler temperature. Or you've gone into an old gym where they had these huge, big old globe incandescent lights, and you're looking at your pictures and everything has a yellow tint. It's a little warm. Well, again, the beauty of editing programs, that's something that can be easily corrected. You can take a picture that has a yellow tint, and in your editing program, most of your basic editing programs are going to have a dial where you can change that, but why not get it right the first time? And so on your camera, you'll notice on the dials there, when you push your auto white balance and then start dialing down, it'll go down and you'll see a little lightning bolt. That's telling you if you're using flash. Or they may have a little 2 which represents fluorescent, or they might have sunshine or the incandescent bulb. And all it does is it tells the camera, depending on the quality of camera you have, it's like, okay, we're shooting in this kind of lighting, let's help this camera out and this guy so he doesn't have to spend all this time correcting every photograph. And you can tell real quick, you can adjust the setting, take a sample shot, whoa, that's even more yellow, okay, dial it back. And then if you want to get really nerdy, you can actually set it on the K setting and then go in and, play around, and you can actually set the temperature before you shoot it, and then it will kind of dial in and give you a more properly exposed photograph where you don't have the bluish tint. But even, I'm always using different analogies, but you get a guy that frames the house and it's a little out of square, he goes, that's all right, the sheetrock guys will cover it up. The sheetrock guy comes in and leaves gaps, and that's all right, the painters will get it, Painters don't like any of the construction guys. So you can go in and usually correct pretty much a color tint, with the hue or whatever, and dial it back down.
I don't know if you remember this, but when I first started this whole mess, we were talking and you said, let's go ahead and fix the edits in the camera to save you time on the back end. So the editing process, so fixing the camera settings right the first time,
right,
with a little fudge room to play around with, depending on what you want to do, it does save a tremendous amount of time in edits.
Well, as somebody told me one time, they said, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, where are you going to have time to go back and fix it? Which, good point.
So we will leave that very basic stuff there. It's something people can play with, some people can look further into, but let's talk about the iPhone or Android or whatever, if you have. But this is always with us, and it's not a bad camera. Even the older phones, taking great pictures with them. But because it's always there, and even if I'm out shooting somewhere, I'll always take this out and click something just so I have it, just in case something crazy went on with the cameras. But if you get that iPhone, you don't have all these settings, and you're just kind of at that mercy. And I think there's a lot of editing to be done on the back end. In our ebook that we put out, that's available to everybody watching, we kind of talk about some of my favorite apps that we use. But before we get to the apps, let's talk about just some best practices with the iPhone and some things you can do just to help out.
Don't be afraid of using your phone to get a picture on the run. I was covering a playoff volleyball game last year down at Mount Pleasant, and I was on an assignment. I was shooting for the newspaper here in town, and so at the end of the game, the I don't know, it might have been basketball, volleyball. It was I think it was volleyball. And anyway, the girls had won, and it was the first time they'd won this level, and there was a lot of celebration going on, and I knew that the newspaper would want to tweet something out real quick.
Yeah.
So I pulled out my iPhone, because I could easily upload, and the principal of the school just started laughing, and he pulled out and took a picture of me. I was sitting here with probably $6,000 to $8,000 worth of camera hanging around my neck, taking a picture with my phone.
Yeah.
He said, "Do you know how stupid you look?" And I said, "Well, this was the one that I needed for this moment in time. It's the one I needed to upload." But it was kind of comical. I was out at Monument Valley last fall doing an RV trip with my father-in-law, and it's a very scenic, iconic spot. And it was comical because people from all around the world were just lined up getting the sunset shot on this iconic view. And I mean, just thousands and thousands of dollars of high-end camera equipment. I mean, photographers all bunched in, and they were all doing the same thing. They still were pulling out the iPhones and taking pictures because they wanted maybe that instant upload or gratification. I say that to say that these things take tremendous photos. They really do. And it's just a matter of, you know, lining up your photograph, kind of getting an eye on it. You obviously, you know, maybe it's not that obvious. Whenever you're taking pictures, especially outdoors, you want your sunlight behind you. I mean, that's just kind of a given.
Yeah.
Anytime you're shooting into the light, it's going to make your photo look flat. But plan the shot out. Look at that picture. What is it that you're seeing? Don't be afraid to, you know, play around with the positioning and the framing of the photograph. I still, to this day, and I'm doing more video with my drone work, but, you know, if you post a video where you shoot vertically, and you post it online, there are those out there that will shame you quickly for not doing it.
Yeah, and I'm one of those. Don't do that, please.
So I've learned to do that. But, you know, take, for example, the water bottle. Nothing really significant about it. And I could take a quick picture of the photograph or the water bottle right there in the middle of my photograph. And basically what I have is I have a picture of a water bottle. Well, there's a little thing they teach you in Art 101, and I've never had an art class. And I will confess, I've never had any formal training with the photography. I've just kind of figured it out over the years through a lot of trial and error practice and asking people and going online. And I realized that one of the things that I started doing, just because I thought it looked cooler, had a name to it. It's called the rule of thirds. Yeah. Okay? So I take a picture and I have this water bottle in the middle of the picture, and that's all that is. But I can actually frame or compose the photograph to where I have that bottle off to the side, and then maybe I have open space there, and you say, well, that's just dead space. Well, it somehow gives more depth or more draw to that water bottle when you kind of have it set to the side. A lot of times I'll do portraits that way. You know, I just finished a senior photo session last night, and you know, one of the things I like to do is to compose that picture where the subject is kind of off to the side, looking off to their future or whatever, and you have that open space, and it just kind of stirs the imagination. So composing the photograph is just something that you want to do. You don't want to be shooting into light. Get down at that ground level. I know I've seen a lot of the pictures that you've done, and you have a very good eye for this. I was kind of like intrigued. What's he want me to come on here? He could do the class himself. But just getting down eye level was something. I took a picture last night. The girl we were on the old bridge over there by the trail. I'll be 57 in January, and my wife keeps wanting me to take yoga, and I said, I'm doing yoga every time I go out for a photo shoot. Yeah. So I asked the girl, I said, okay, do me a favor. It's an old wood bridge. I said, we did several poses. I said, would you mind laying down for me and doing the front shot? And she said, sure. I said, and I'll get down there with you too. So I was at the other end of the bridge, laying down on those old splinters, and I was shooting and just getting down at ground level, and just seeing the wood lay out there just gave the picture that much more interest.
And don't be afraid to look kind of silly.
Oh, no.
So, you know, back to that whole New York bit, my wife and I are in Central Park, and there's that, I can't remember the name right now, of that castle. It's on. But I had her standing up against the wall, and we shot this whole tower up, right? But in order to get as much of her in there that I wanted, and still this whole tower, I had to get up on the wall with my legs up, propped on it, on the ground, where like all these people are walking by, and it's like, I know I look dumb, but I'm in New York, and these people never see me again. But at the same time, it made a great shot, and you know, it was worth it for me, especially.
As we tell ourselves, it's all about the picture.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I actually, when I shoot basketball games, I bought a device last year. It's called a Magic Arm, and I can clamp up a camera. And I went up to the rafters at Paris High, the stadium, looking directly down at the net, and had a little remote on there.
Nice.
So I was able to shoot directly down. It was an awful lot of work getting up there. I had to wait till after the game to get back up and pull it down. And, maybe got a handful of shots, but it was something different. And I think when you're always looking for something a little bit different, it keeps you engaged, stimulates the imagination, and you just never know when you're going to get that shot that's just going to be the winner shot.
Yeah. And look, we're talking about vegetables here, right? Fruits, vegetables. But at the same time, I'm telling you guys, if you will just practice and play with it, like try to take one thing, 30 different pictures one way, and see the differences. One of the things I talk about in the ebook is the ability to put text on photos now, and how you can start labeling things and branding, your farm's goods. Having that bottle to the side with that rule of thirds and having that open space gives you a place to put that text.
Exactly.
It's very important. One other little tip I'll throw in that I always like to use is if there's a wall here and I'm taking a picture there, I'll butt my phone up against there, sideways.
Yeah.
It's a good habit. But I'll butt it up against something for a stabilization point, so I don't have a tripod for my iPhone, right? But I can steady it somehow or lay it down on something. So that's always helped,
Exactly.
especially if I'm trying to focus in or something like that.
Exactly. And again, I don't think you can stress this point enough. Consider your own viewing habits. Whether you're in a doctor's office flipping through a magazine, or you're online going through some various pages or news stories, what is it that usually stops you in your tracks and draws you into something particular? More often than not, it's going to be a photograph that captured your eye. We are inundated with thousands and thousands and thousands of images every day that show up on our Facebook feed and ads and TV and billboards and everywhere that you can possibly conceive. And it's the shot that captures your eye, that draws your attention. And I mean, really, if you have a business, whatever it is that you're marketing, whether it's clothes, whether it's food, what have you, you're competing for people's attention. And it's just
Microsecond.
you have a microsecond to do it. And sometimes you'll get lucky and get a shot that will really be one to hang on the wall. But most of the time, those shots are planned. And it's just a matter of knowing what you want and wanting that look and planning it. Again, I'm using the sports thing again because I do a lot of that. But one of the hardest sports to shoot is volleyball, because it's just the ball's going everywhere. You have this net that's interfering with the focus, the autofocus, and so I had this lady ask me about how do I get the volleyball shots. I said, honestly, I shoot a lot of sports. The volleyball is the hardest, even for me to this day, especially at the beginning of the year. It's just crazy because it's so unpredictable, and there's always bodies. And I said, I have learned that I get my best volleyball shots for the ones that I plan. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, invariably there's going to be a shot where that ball is going to go flying over to the net, and some girl is going to dive, and she's fixing to hit that wood floor and right above the ground. Well, you don't know when that's going to happen. So I might spend an entire game sitting on the floor in the back of the thing with my big lens, and I know it's going to be a girl on the back row, and I guarantee I come home every game with at least 2 or 3 decent shots where they did that because I planned for it.
You waited for the moment.
I waited for a moment because I knew it was going to happen. Same thing with that girl that spikes, that gets up there. If she's right-handed and you're on the side that she's closest to, you're going to get her backside. You have to plan and get over to the other side. Same thing with a basketball player that slam dunks. You don't see a lot of those in high school around here, but and that's the first thing I'll do. If I know I've got some kids that can slam dunk the basketball, are they right-handed or they're left-handed? Because I know which way they're going to come when they do it, and I want to get a shot not from the behind or the opposite end. I want to get that facial shot where they're going up and slamming it in. So I plan for the shot. Sometimes you just have to wait for it.
It may not happen, but
it may not happen, but boy, when it does, you win.
You mentioned something very, very important, and that's the ability, to pull out that iPhone and to immediately have it on social. So as people have followed me throughout the course of filming all this, and I've traveled around, a lot of these updates are in real time. And I'm talking about seconds after the moment happened. In farming, it may not be as important on your day-to-day operations. Where I find that really important is at events like the flea market or something like that. So, or not the flea market, I'm sorry, the farmer's market. So if you're at market setting up on Sunday and you want people, you want to give that little reminder nudge, hey, we're out here, come check us out. Boom, real time, they're here.
You know, I forgot all about the market until I saw one of your pictures here not too long ago. It was on a Saturday. And I knew I had wanted to go up there. In fact, I think it was for the chili hatch when they were roasting the chilies. And I completely forgot about it. And, you know, again, it showed up in my Instagram feed and was like, oh, that's right. And I made a beeline. In fact, I remember seeing you while I was up there. And I went up there to get it. Another case in point, again, for those that are out there that are maybe older school or have not just dove into the whole social media thing, they really don't realize what they're missing out on, because this is where everybody is now. Like it or not, love it or hate it.
It's your customized news feed.
It is exactly.
What's important to you.
And a case in point, I was looking for a venue here not too long ago, and you're familiar with the Loft here in town, and I know the lady that owns that, and she has a pretty good social media presence, and so I follow her on the Instagram, and she hadn't been on there in a while. And I had come up against, I was trying to look for a venue to host something, and I was just racking my brain trying to think, where could I do this event at? And someone said, well, have you thought about the Loft? And it was like, well, yeah, why didn't I think about that? And I actually saw her a couple of days later, and I said, you haven't been on social media lately, have you? She goes, no, I've just been so busy. And I relayed to her, I said, guess what? I was in search of a venue. Don't ask me why. I didn't even think about your place. Somebody else suggested it. I said, but if I had been seeing you, and she, boy, really took that to heart. Of course, then the next few weeks,
yeah, and I've noticed, yeah.
You know, every day something was in there.
So this, we're going to get off photography for a minute, but what I hear a lot of people, especially new to social media or new to advertising or marketing or anything like that, well, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to be in their inbox all the time. I don't want to be in the news feed all the time. But that exact thing happens. You become background noise. And just the mere, even if they're just scrolling, but they see that name, even if they don't click on it, it's a reminder that you're still in business. It's a reminder that you're still relevant, and it shows kind of what's going on. And if you have that great picture, instead of just scrolling, maybe you'll get that stop. Maybe you'll get that click. So a lot of people, whenever they first start out, they expect all these results. But social media is a long game. And it's only a long game effectively if you're doing it all the time, getting better at it. You don't have to start and be perfect, right? But you just have to start and practice.
Okay, well, let me, again, personal testimony here, because this ties in with this. I was a school teacher for 20 plus years. I retired a year and a half ago, and I'm doing photography full time. I'll tell you why I am in photography full time today. It's because of Facebook. Yeah. It's because of social media. You know, in the film days, you know, you'd go take your roll of film up to Walmart, and then they'd give you this little chimsy album with your pictures. Well, you didn't go around to school and work and hand this, hey, everybody gather around, look at my pictures. You know, you just didn't do that. You had them, and, you know, occasionally you might show them to somebody. Nowadays, you go take pictures, you post them online, people can go look at those at any time. I have people that go look at my web page or my Facebook page at 2 in the morning if they're working or getting off work or they're up or insomnia or any time of the day at their convenience. And if I've shot a local game, they know to go look, and they're going to maybe see pictures of their kids. And it was them going to my page, coming back and seeing those pictures that then they realized, oh, do you do family pictures, and do you do senior portraits, and do you do weddings? And it just grew. I didn't plan this. I did not plan into doing photography full time. I was looking for something to keep me out of trouble and busy after my youngest daughter went off to college, and I was home a lot. And believe me, when it all of a sudden became a reality, it was mind-boggling to look back at how I got here. Think in terms of television. When you're at home, when do you see all the pizza commercials with the bubbling cheese being strung? It's usually around dinner time. Yeah. Why is that? Because marketing 101, appeal to the senses with something visual at that prime time. So whether it's that pizza that you're pulling up or in the morning and you see the pancakes, let's go to IHOP, forget this here at the house, let's go get, that visual is capturing people's imagination, it's triggering all kinds of sensors, and it's spurring them on to act. And the fact that nowadays you have for the most part, a free medium where thousands of people are out there, your simple picture that is captured in such a way is going to trigger people to want to know more or desire more.
All right, so earlier we talked a little bit about drones, but I really wanted to, that kind of put your name out there significantly. You were the first person in the area, and I think the most prolific person to do drone work. You've done drone work out here when we were building our high tunnel, and after the high tunnel was done, we've flown over crops, and I'm talking about what a unique way to show your farm. Just talk a little bit. It's so early with this kind of photography, but just talk about your experience with it and what it's done for you, and more importantly, what you've seen it do for some clients.
I'm not a gamer. I'm not into toys and gadgets. When I first heard about drones, I remember thinking, well, that's, I guess, interesting. I was shooting an event for a local fundraiser in town, and they had me doing the still shots, and they also had hired somebody to come out and do video. And so they were doing all the video work, and so I was chatting with him off and on, just asking about his setup, and he said, I got a drone, you'd like to see it? And I was like, well, I've heard about those, what is it? And so he pulled his out real quick, and the little quadcopter with a GoPro mounted to it. He launched it up, and I watched him on the control, and I just remember thinking, well, that was kind of interesting, I guess. I wasn't really quite seeing it, but it was interesting. And then fast forward a few months later, it was Labor Day weekend. Didn't have school that day, I was off. My wife and I were sitting there drinking coffee, watching the Today Show. And there was some footage on there. They were showing what was trending, and some guy had a drone out of his lake home. And he was filming high def, and you could see the cabin and the shoreline and the dock and the kids milling around. And all of a sudden, the drone started losing power over the water. And so you're watching this guy in panic, throwing his keys, wallet, phone out of his shorts, and he's running out in the water, and he catches it just before it hits the water. And my wife's comment was, that was pretty cool. How come you don't have one of those? And I looked at her, and she goes, you could use that in your business. And I'll look into that. And so I started researching them, and kind of did some research online and found one that I thought would work and ordered it, and I was so intimidated by it when it got there at the house. I mean, it probably sat there for 3 weeks. I'm just not one that likes to read manuals, and it just was intimidating. But I finally got out of the box and got the thing flying and was just mesmerized by it. The fact that it could take such an incredibly clear picture and video while flying around, and it was relatively easy to fly.
And we're not talking about like a little bit. I mean, these guys go up there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was flying above the tree lines of my house and higher, and so I mean, I was just doing random. Hey, there I am in my front yard waving, and I remember posting my first clip, and there was nothing to it. I'd come in from church. I was out there in my slacks and thought I'd come out and fly for the first time. I'd gotten brave and launched it up, and it was turned around looking at me, and I waved at it, and then I landed it. And I posted this 15-second clip, and people were going crazy with it. And I'm like, wow, I think I'm onto something here. And so next thing you know, I'm just, from a photographer's point of view, if it wasn't for the camera, I'd have no interest in it, okay? But from the photographer's point of view, the vantage point that it gave me to capture images that you couldn't get without it, I just started trying to think like a bird. Gee, I wonder what it looks like for a wheat combine harvest, or what those cotton fields look like from 400 feet up, or what does it look like to buzz around that silo, or what have you. And so I just started going out and taking pictures of things. There's that big light post there on the loop that's got all the globes. I went up and looked down, and just the aesthetics and the geometrical shape and the way it looked, and the road and the grass. I mean, it just became art from a completely different vantage point. And so I just started posting, and people couldn't get enough of it. They just could not. And I have to say, there was something about the drone. And I mean, I've been doing still photography and sporting events for years in the area now. But the drone use and posting what I was getting started to put me on the map, so to speak. and people because I was the first guy in the area that I know of that had one of these. So it was new, it was a novelty, and I think what helped me was I already kind of had an eye for things photographically, and so I could go out and do pictures with that drone from a different vantage point and post it, and it just added that much more to it.
Yeah. One of the things that's always struck me about this timeline of yours is you were first to market with it, and I'm a big proponent of being first to market on something, especially if it's unique. So if anybody ever comes into this town, at least, with a drone, even though you did your drone work long before, like, say, somebody in Dallas would put something up, for the local area, if you think of drone, you think Tony Corso. And that's going to be the case for a long time coming.
Well, interesting story on that. My very first drone, I'd had it for about 3 or 4 months, and I was just trying to think of some things I could do with it that would, to make some money with it in the footage. And I'm a golfer, grew up golfing, and I was thinking about how, you go out and you play on a golf course that you've never played before. You come up on these long dogleg holes, and you got the little map, but it was like, wow, what if you could, because everybody has a phone with them, what if you're playing a course you've never played before, and you come up onto the 5th hole and you don't know where the green is, and you log into the golf course website and you watch a 10-second flyover of the drone videoing that. So I was thinking about doing this to market. So I went out to the Paris Country Club, and it was in March. No, it was in February, early part of February, winter.
Yeah, because there's no leaves on the trees.
No, and
I've seen this.
Yeah, I just wanted to practice, and I had what was known in the drone industry as a flyaway. And my drone got up, and it was a little breezy, and for some reason, and the technology has improved on them, and this was a traumatic experience for me. The drone just got a mind of its own and just took off. I mean, it just went. And I just sat there and, just...
And it didn't go for just like, it went a ways.
Oh, it disappeared.
Yeah.
It wasn't coming back, and I was killing the transmitter, which is supposed to make it return where it launched. It was gone. And I was just traumatized. It was $1,200 just gone, just like that. And I didn't know what I was going to tell my wife, and I came home, and her response was, well, gosh, sweetie, I guess you need to get another one. I was like, she's a gem, let me just tell you right now. But I put flyers out all over in that area, thinking maybe somebody would come across it. 11 months goes by. Now, I've already replaced it. 11 months goes by. We've had a very rainy year. Some guy, half a mile out past the golf course, was cleaning fence line, found my drone there next to some of his fence in a pasture. He vaguely remembered somebody putting out flyers, didn't have it anymore. So you know what he did? He went into Google, an older guy. I was impressed that he did this. He went in and Googled drones, Paris, Texas. Guess whose name came up?
There you go.
Got my drone back. Video card was still intact, and I got to watch that flight in full HD video as it finally landed on his fence line.
Yeah.
So it was crazy.
And again, Paris, Texas, drone, Tony Corso, first to market, and again, it really did put your name up there, because I hadn't heard of you before, and so that drone work was why I started following you. I think we have a mutual admiration for each other's pictures, but, when you find somebody that speaks your same kind of language and you appreciate their work, you are able to follow them, and that's what happens when you put great pictures up on your farm and you develop a following, and then next thing you know, next time somebody thinks about tomato, they think of you. It's a great connector, these photos.
Well, and I've loved doing some stuff. I had a guy do soybeans and the harvest, cotton harvest, and this is agricultural area, and love getting up and filming some of that stuff, just from that vantage point. But again, it's just that different angle.
Yeah.
It's just finding another way to take the picture from a different angle that not anybody else is doing, and that's what captures people's eye and attention.
And look, if you don't have a drone, there's nothing to say you couldn't get on top of a building or a ladder or on the ground or behind something.
Hey, get a kite, duct tape, put your phone on
do
there.
Something.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, this has been a tremendous help, not only to me, but I think a lot of other people out there. We will have some downloadable content for you. Some little cheat sheets for ISO and the aperture and whatnot. But I've really appreciated you coming out here today. It's nice to film in my hometown for once. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
I've been falling deeper, crawling on the ocean floor. I've been sinking into you, my love and number one. I left traces of my name across your bedroom door. Plastic roses.